Irma's beginning to wind down over the next couple of days, and now lots of eyes are turning towards the Atlantic and the next hurricane that's out at sea, Hurricane Jose, which has been following behind Irma and at times has been a major hurricane. Now, as of the 11 a.m. advisory on Monday, it's a Category 2 storm, maximum sustained winds 105 miles an hour, and you see here very close to where the path of Irma was, just a couple of hundred miles further back to the north and west. But here's the deal with Jose. It's going to end up turning away from the United States, but then making a loop in the middle of the Atlantic. The steering currents send it in that direction. Then Jose will make a turn back towards the west. And as we take that cone of uncertainty out 5 days, by Saturday morning, it could be anywhere between the Bahamas and all the way up in the Atlantic, halfway in between the U.S. and Bermuda. So is it going to end up being a fish storm, or could there be impacts along the U.S.? Because that cone of uncertainty sure looks scary, right? Looks like it's heading towards Florida. I want to show you the computer models, though, to explain what likely will end up happening with Jose if current model trends hold true. Jose will make that loop in the Atlantic, come closer to the Bahamas, but then the models into the weekend have Jose turning back to the north. And if this path holds true, Jose would end up being a fish storm in between Bermuda and the eastern seaboard. Could that still pose some impacts? Maybe a little rough surf on the Atlantic side of the U.S., but we'll have to watch it very closely because the average cone of uncertainty 5 days out has a track error more than 200 miles. A lot can change between now and this weekend, but we're certainly watching it close.
You know, they were talking about climate change yesterday, and now we're learning that scientists and researchers are looking at how to change the weather on purpose. That's right. Lasers now could one day manipulate rain and lightning. CBS This Morning contributor Michio Kaku is a physics professor at City College of New York. Professor, nice to see you. Extraordinary seeing Al Gore and Bill Clinton there together with Charlie, wasn't it?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, they did not get into this discussion, though. But it is fascinating. I mean, lasers, really, to change the weather?
That's right. Well, as Mark Twain once famously said, everyone complains about the weather, but no one ever does anything about it. Well, instead of doing a rain dance, we physicists are firing trillion-watt lasers into the sky to actually precipitate rain clouds and actually bring down lightning bolts. This is potentially a game changer.
But this is experimental.
It's experimental. However, in the laboratory so far it works. When you have water vapor and you have dust particles or ice crystals, you can precipitate rain. It condenses around the seeds. These seeds can also be created by laser beams. By firing trillion-watt lasers, you rip apart the electrons, creating what are called ions, and these ions act like seeds, like dust particles, bringing down rain and even lightning.
Go ahead.
Well, this fascinates me in part because, too, I remember reading the stories that China had used this during the Olympics, that the USSR had used this after Chernobyl to create rain clouds. I mean, did those really work then? We have some of these capabilities now?
Inconclusive. Even in the 60s, the CIA used this to bring down monsoons during the Vietnam War, to wash out the Viet Cong. Governments have been playing with this thing.
Alleged to.
Alleged to, right.
Yeah.
Now, we realize that for decades now, these governments have been alleged to have experimented with weather control, but nothing conclusive. This time we're bringing in the laws of physics rather than simply waving our hands and uttering mumbo-jumbo. We're actually using trillion-watt lasers now. And in the laboratory, sure enough, they precipitate rain out of water vapor. Sure enough, you can actually bring down electricity down the beam.
So what does it mean for drought areas that need to have rain for crops, and if they don't have them, there's the consequences of famine?
Well, the bad news is if it's a clear blue sky, it's not going to do anything at all because it only takes water vapor that's already in the air and condenses it. However, for floods, for agriculture, farmers, for people planning wedding parties, football games, you name it, outdoor events and agriculture and flooding and even hurricanes, all of them could be subject to weather modification.
Incredibly interesting, Professor Michio Kaku. Thank you so much.
hurricanes like Harvey to form in the first place? Here with some answers is Michio Kaku, a CBS News science contributor and City University of New York physics professor. Professor, good morning.
Glad to be on the show.
So when you look at the storm as it sits right now hanging over Texas, what concerns you most about Harvey?
Several things. First of all, if it lingers over the land, it could cause massive flooding. And then, watch out, if it goes back into the Gulf, it could get re-energized and create a second, even a third landfall. And so the agony has just begun with this hurricane of the decade.
Michio, let's talk about the science behind hurricanes. How actually do they form?
Well, believe it or not, a hurricane is sort of like a bowling ball. They form off the coast of Africa as a small breeze, and then they gather energy as they go toward warm water across the Atlantic. And then if it comes in just right, it'll get a strike. It'll go into the Gulf of Mexico, get energized by the warm water, or it could be a gutter ball and simply veer off in the direction, wrong direction. This hurricane went right through into the Gulf, got energized by the warm water, and now hitting Texas.
That fuel of the warm water. What about the speed? Because it was moving faster and slowed down. What's the impact there?
Well, when it hits landfall, you have friction, plus it no longer is energized by the warm water beneath it. And so velocity drops enormously, and it goes from Category 4 to Category 1 within a matter of hours after it hits landfall. But watch out. If it goes back into the water, it can get re-energized, and the nightmare starts all over again.
Yeah, because we're still experiencing, even in a Category 1, we're still dealing with flooding and storm surges, yes?
That's right. And just remember that the Gulf of Mexico is 2 degrees warmer than normal. And that has set off alarm bells in Washington. Just last month, the government issued a warning stating that because of the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico, this hurricane season, which goes on till the end of November, could be one of the worst in memory. So watch out. There could be more monster hurricanes to come.
And that's the theory that climate change is impacting all of this.
Well, we're not sure, okay? However, there's no smoking gun. But it is consistent with the fact that the Gulf is warming up, and that is the energy that is driving these monster hurricanes. And according to the government, this hurricane season, watch out.
Right.
We've been talking about storm surges all morning. What exactly causes a storm surge, Michio?
Well, storm surges could be 12, 13 feet tall, and as the waves that are whipped around at 130 miles an hour hit landfall, sometimes they get bunched up as they go toward land, and that's why you get these huge monster waves hitting the coast, coming in at 130 miles an hour.
I feel like we've talked a lot about some of the different storms that have hit, and maybe it's some of its comparison. Take something like Superstorm Sandy in comparison to Harvey or even Katrina. Can you make any kind of comparison with those?
Yes, Sandy had caused about $70 billion in property damage, and it was only a Category 3, but it went right up the Northeast, causing tremendous flooding and damage in a very heavily populated and very densely populated area.
Right.
And Katrina was Category 5. It had property damage about $100 billion, and it actually created cracks in the levees, right, which then flooded New Orleans. Now here we don't have that situation, but I think it's going to be up there. It's going to be up there and perhaps among the top 10.
Why do you say that, Michio?
Because this hurricane is a monster hurricane. It's 130 miles an hour wind. It's lingering. It's stationary right now. It could cause a tremendous amount of flooding, blackouts, evacuations, and it could get re-energized again. So we're just seeing the beginning of the agony.
Right. Dr. Michio Kaku, thanks so much for being with us this morning.
With Irma winding down, some people are now asking, Jose, are we going to have to worry about Hurricane Jose in the future on the east coast of the U.S.? Here's the answer. It is a strong hurricane. Okay. You're right. No, you're right. Thank you. I appreciate it. All right. 3, 2. With Irma winding down over the next couple of days, people are now turning to Jose and asking, are we going to have to worry about this hurricane in the Atlantic? Could it pose threats for the United States? Here's the latest track from the National Hurricane Center, the 11 o'clock advisory this morning. Category 2 storm, maximum sustained winds 105 miles an hour. Here's the deal with this one. This one ends up moving further away from us, but then doing a loop-de-loop in the Atlantic and then coming back westward closer to the Bahamas and the United States. We'll stop the cone of uncertainty here on Saturday afternoon as far as it goes out by 5 days. And you see, look, that's on a trajectory that may have some people worrying, is that making a beeline towards Florida? I need to show you spaghetti models to really explain the situation, because no, it's not necessarily heading straight towards Florida. So we see these spaghetti models. These are showing where the center of Jose is going to go based on several different weather models that we look at. They do that loop-de-loop, head back to the west. But watch this. As we go into the weekend, a lot of them, and most of them, are curving Jose back to the north, leaving it a fish storm rather than having it continue on that westward trajectory. So do we need to watch Jose very closely? Absolutely. Could there be some impacts on the East Coast? It is entirely too early to say. We could just be dealing with some rough surf. It could also, the models